Before cars, before highways, and long before smartphones, there was Michigan, raw, resilient, and rising from the wilderness.
You are looking at a photo of a thriving American town. It had banks, hotels, and families. But look closer. This isn't a flood. It isn't a fire. The earth itself is eating the town. Historians say this was just erosion. But if you connect this photo to a massacre in the Upper Peninsula and a creature sighting in the North Woods, a pattern emerges. A pattern that didn't stop in the 1800s. They reveal mysteries no one expected. The warning, the Dogman, and the woods. At first, this looks like just an old photo from the late 1800s. It shows a busy town in northern Michigan. But if you look closer, behind the buildings, you see something strange. It isn't just a picture of a town being built. It shows a world being destroyed. To understand this, we have to go back in time. Before Michigan was known for cars, it was famous for lumber. It is the 1880s. The forests on the East Coast were empty. The country was growing fast and needed wood to build houses and cities. Michigan had exactly what they needed. They called the trees green gold. These were giant white pines. They were strong, light, and easy to move down the rivers. This time period was all about money. A few rich owners made millions, and towns grew overnight. But there was a big cost. They treated the forest like an enemy. At first, they only cut trees in the winter, but they got greedy. With the rapid development of industrialization, especially with the creation of big motorized saws and the building of railways, the demand for lumber skyrocketed through the roof. They started cutting trees all day and night. They didn't just harvest the forest, they stripped the land completely bare. By 1890, they had cut down almost every pine tree in the state. There were no rules, and nobody planted new trees. They just cut them down and moved on. They left behind a wasteland. The ground was ruined and fires burned easily. They thought the trees would last forever. They were wrong. In the middle of this rush for money, a photographer took a picture. That would change the trajectory of the town, and not for good. He believed he was capturing a proud moment of a growing town. But when the image was developed, it revealed something else. He had unknowingly captured a warning hiding in the dark. If you look at the edge of the tree line in the photo, you can see it lurking in the shadows. It is blurred, but the outline is impossible to ignore. It stands on two legs like a man, but it has the head of a wolf. It is nearly 7 feet tall. The locals didn't talk about it openly, but they whispered about it in the logging camps. They called it the Dogman. For years, people thought it was just a story to scare children. But the records from 1887 tell a different story. As the loggers cut deeper into the ancient forests, they didn't just destroy the trees. They woke something up. This creature wasn't hunting for food. It was watching.
Michigan mystery, and in my opinion, maybe one of the best. I'm talking about the Michigan Dogman. The Dogman entered the public spotlight.
It appeared right when the destruction was at its worst. The photo proves that while the lumber barons were counting their money, something ancient was counting them. But the horror was just beginning. In 1887, in Wexford County, 2 lumberjacks spotted a strange animal. They thought it was a dog and chased it into a hollow log. Laughing, one man poked inside with a stick, but he wasn't laughing for long. The first sign of danger came from an unearthly scream shook the ground. The creature crawled out, but it didn't run on 4 legs. It stood up. It stared them in the eye. It had a man's body and a dog's head. The men fled in terror and never returned. But this might not be a coincidence. The loggers were destroying the forests at record speeds, and the monster appeared exactly when the destruction peaked. It makes you wonder if it wasn't just a beast, but a guardian. And it didn't end there. 10 years later, A farmer was found dead surrounded by giant dog tracks. 10 years after that, a widow reported dogs walking like men. Every decade, the creature returned to stalk the land, or so they say. However, there is a major problem with this history. When you look at the facts, the legend falls apart. The story did not survive from the 1800s. It was actually created in a radio station in Traverse City, Michigan, on April 1st, 1987, April Fool's Day, by a disc jockey named Steve Cook, who wanted to play a prank. He wrote a song called The Legend. He admits that he invented the history based on American folklore. He purportedly made the loggers in 1887 because 87 rhymed with heaven. The farmer in 1897, another rhyme. The horses in 1917, pure fiction created to fit the music. Cook created the 10-year cycle simply to give the song a catchy rhythm. It wasn't based on old records, it was based on songwriting. This makes us wonder, what about the photo evidence? For years, people claimed it was proof, but that was a hoax too. In 2010, the truth was revealed. The monster in the video was a man named Mike Agrusa. He wasn't a beast. He was wearing a ghillie suit, a camouflage outfit used by hunters. He filmed it on vintage stock, specifically to fool people. So the loggers were terrified of a beast that didn't exist. They spent their nights watching the tree line, waiting for a monster to attack. But they were looking in the wrong direction. While they were staring at the woods, the real monster was waking up beneath their feet. It didn't have claws, it didn't have fangs, and it didn't need to howl to kill a town. It just needed the wind. The burial. While the loggers in the north were inventing monsters, the residents of Singapore, Michigan, were ignoring the real monster right outside their door. This town wasn't built by locals. It was founded in 1836 by rich speculators from New York. They had a massive dream. They wanted Singapore to be a rival to Chicago. And for a while, it worked. They had busy sawmills, huge hotels, and even the state's first schoolhouse. It was a thriving port sitting right at the mouth of the Kalamazoo River. But their success became their downfall. After the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, the demand for wood exploded. The mills in Singapore ran faster than ever to help rebuild the city. To make a quick profit, they cut down every tree in sight. They even cut down the trees that stood between the town and the beach. They didn't realize it, but those trees were the only thing holding the earth in place. Look at this photo of the old boarding house. It looks like a normal building, but look at the ground. That isn't snow, it is sand, and it is rising up to the roof. The greed of the lumber boom had blinded them. They removed their only shield against the elements. The curse here wasn't a creature in the mind. It was a physical force of nature. Once the protective trees were gone, the winds from Lake Michigan hit the massive sand dunes. The dunes woke up. It was a slow-motion disaster. It didn't happen in a single night. It happened over the years. Imagine living in a house where the ground keeps rising. It wasn't a sudden wave. It was a relentless, daily siege. The sand didn't just cover the ground. It attacked the buildings. The grains were sharp silica, driven by gale-force winds off the lake. Residents found that their windows didn't just get dirty, they were destroyed. The blowing sand etched the glass until it was frosty and opaque, like it had been sandblasted. You couldn't see out, and the light couldn't get in. Inside, the silence was terrifying. As the dunes rose up the walls, they acted like soundproofing. The noise of the busy street, the sawmills, and the harbor faded away. It was replaced by the constant hissing sound of sand shifting against the wood. Every morning, the people of Singapore woke up to a nightmare. It wasn't like shoveling snow that would eventually melt. They shoveled heavy, wet sand that would only come back an hour later. It was a psychological war. You clear your front door, turn your back, and the wind fills the path again. It was exhausting. It felt like the earth itself was telling them to leave. They were fighting gravity and nature, and they knew they were losing. The sand got into the food, the beds, and the water. It was a slow suffocation of their entire way of life. The residents watched helplessly as the landscape turned against them. First, the sand covered the streets. Then it crept up the porches. Finally, it crushed the roofs. They tried to shovel it away, but the wind always brought more. The residents watched helplessly as the landscape turned against them. First, the sand covered the streets. Then it crept up the porches. Finally, it crushed the roofs. They tried to shovel it away, but the wind always brought more. By the 1880s, the town was dead. It became a ghost town, buried alive. Today, Singapore is known as Michigan's Pompeii. It lies deep beneath the dunes, a silent victim of the people who thought they could strip the land and survive. In Singapore, the curse was satisfied with wood, bricks, and mortar. It took the town, but it let the people escape. But a curse is like a fire. It consumes everything in its path, and eventually, it runs out of wood. In 1913, deep in copper country, the curse stopped asking for buildings. It started asking for blood. And this time, it wouldn't be a slow burial. It would be over in 10 horrifying minutes. The blood sacrifice. We have seen how the greed of the 19th century devoured the forests of the Lower Peninsula. We have seen how it ignored the laws of nature in Singapore, burying an entire community under the sand. But to understand the darkest chapter of this story, we have to travel north, past the straits, into the Upper Peninsula, to a place called Calumet. Here, the prize wasn't timber, it was copper. By 1913, Michigan was providing the metal that wired the world. The Calumet and Hecla Mining Company was one of the most powerful corporations on Earth. They built a glorious city on top of the rock. They had libraries, theaters, and schools. On the surface, it looked like paradise. But underground, it was a war zone. Thousands of immigrants, mostly from Finland, Croatia, and Italy, toiled in the deep shafts. They worked in dangerous conditions for pennies a day. While the owners in Boston grew rich, the families in Calumet were starving. In the summer of 1913, the miners had enough. They went on strike. They demanded better pay, safer tools, and a shorter workday. The company responded with brute force. They hired private investigators, armed guards, and thugs to break the will of the workers. For months, the copper country was under siege. There were beatings in the streets, fired in the night. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. The snow piled up, the temperatures dropped, and the families grew desperate. The situation culminated in a grim Christmas Eve that would darken Calumet's history. The Ladies' Auxiliary of the Western Federation of Miners wanted to do something special. They wanted to give the children one night of joy in the middle of a bitter winter. They rented the Italian Hall, a brick building on 7th Street. By the afternoon of December 24th, the hall was packed. Over 400 people were there. Most of them were children. They were dressed in their Sunday best, their faces glowing with excitement. For the first time in months, there was laughter. There was a Christmas tree on the stage. There were small gifts, bags of candy and nuts, for kids who hadn't seen a treat in ages. It was supposed to be a safe haven. But the hatred of the strike was waiting just outside the door. Around 4:30 p.m., The party was in full swing. The children were crowding near the stage, waiting for their presents. The room was loud and happy, oblivious to a sinister act that would happen in a few minutes. While the celebration was ongoing, a man rushed in and screamed, "Fire!" Witnesses later said he came up the stairs and stood in the doorway of the main hall. He was wearing a thick coat and a hat pulled low. On his jacket, some saw a button, a badge, the mark of the Anti-Union Alliance. But here is the twist. There was no fire. The hall wasn't burning, but the fear was instant. In a crowded room on the second floor, that word is a death sentence. The music stopped. The laughter died. Panic took over. Hundreds of people turned and ran for the exit. Mothers grabbed their babies. Children were separated from their parents in the crush. It was a stampede of terror. They all surged toward the steep, narrow staircase that led down to the street. To understand the horror of what happened next, you have to look at the architecture of the building. The staircase was a death trap waiting to happen. It was a steep, narrow tunnel leading from the second floor down to the street. The steps were hard and slick. There was no landing to break the fall. When the panic started, gravity took over. It wasn't just a crowd, it was a human landslide. Physics turned against them. In a stampede like this, the people at the back are running from fear, pushing blindly forward. The people at the front have nowhere to go. The force creates a crush. It isn't about being stepped on. It is about being squeezed. The air is literally pressed out of your lungs by the weight of the bodies behind you. This is where the story usually ends in the history books. For 100 years, people have been told that the tragedy was an accident of architecture. The legend says that the doors at the bottom of the stairs opened inward. They say that when the crowd hit the doors, they couldn't push them open because of the weight of the people behind them. They say it was just a terrible building design. But that is a lie. Look at the photo of the vestibule. Look at the blueprints. The anomaly here isn't the ghost of a wolf or the shifting of sand. The anomaly is the truth. The doors at the Italian hall opened outward. They were standard double doors, designed to swing out into the street. So why didn't they open? Why did 73 people die in that stairwell? If the doors opened outward, the first people down the stairs should have burst through them into the fresh air. The crush should have relieved itself, but it didn't. This changes everything. It means the architectural accident was actually a crime scene. If the doors opened outward, but nobody could get out, it suggests that someone, or something, was holding them shut from the outside. Think about the man who shouted, "Fire!" He didn't stay to help. He disappeared into the night. And think about the thugs who had been terrorizing the town for months. When the panic started, the stampede rushed down the stairs. Bodies piled up, layer upon layer. The pressure was immense. The screams could be heard blocks away. Inside that stairwell, the air was squeezed out of lungs. When the firefighters finally arrived, they didn't find a fire. They found a wall of human bodies. They had to untangle the victims one by one. They carried them out into the snow. 73 people. 59 of them were children. They laid the small bodies on the sidewalk. It was a scene from a nightmare. The parents who had survived were wandering through the snow, screaming the names of their children. The safe haven had become a tomb. This was the darkest manifestation of the curse we have been tracking. In the first act, the curse was born from greed destroying the forest. It created a monster in the minds of the loggers, the Dogman. In the second act, the curse moved to the physical land. The greed destroyed the trees and the sand erased the town of Singapore. But here, in the third act, the curse evolved. It didn't need a wolf. It didn't need sand. It just needed hate. The monster in Calumet wasn't a supernatural beast. It was the man standing in the doorway. It was the men holding the doors shut. It was the man in the alley. The official inquest was a sham. The company blamed the union. The union blamed the company. No one was ever convicted. The man who shouted "Fire" was never identified, even though dozens of people saw him. The badge on his coat was ignored. The tragedy broke the spirit of the strike. The miners were defeated, not by negotiation, but by grief. They had to go back to work in the mines that had their children, working for the same men who had orchestrated their misery. The Italian Hall disaster stands as the ultimate sacrifice to the industry. The greed that stripped the pine and the copper eventually came for the people themselves. It proves that the scariest thing in the Michigan wilderness isn't what hides in the woods. It is what hides in the human heart. Woody Guthrie wrote a song about this night. He sang, "The copper boss's thugs stuck their heads in the door. One of them yelled and he screamed, 'There's a fire.'" He knew the truth. The doors didn't trap those children. The hate did. The land had been stripped bare, and when there was nothing left to take, the industry took the future. After 1913, the screams in Calumet faded. The snow covered the graves. And for 100 years, it felt like the Michigan curse had finally gone to sleep. But it wasn't sleeping. It was evolving. It used the sand to bury Singapore. It used a false cry of fire to crush Calumet. And when it woke up in the 21st century, it decided to poison the water. The awakening. The curse didn't end in the copper mines. It didn't disappear when the snow melted in Calumet. It just went to sleep. It waited for 100 years, hiding in the shadows of Michigan's progress. We told ourselves that we had learned. We told ourselves that the era of the robber barons was over. We thought that modern regulations and government agencies would protect us from the kind of greed that stripped the forests and buried Singapore. But we were wrong. In 2014, the curse woke up. And this time, it didn't attack a remote logging camp or a mining town in the Upper Peninsula. It attacked a major American city. It came for Flint. Flint was the birthplace of General Motors. It was the town that put the world on wheels. For decades, it was a symbol of the American dream. But by the 21st century, the factories had closed and the jobs had left. The city was struggling. It was broke. And just like in the 1880s, when money becomes scarce, greed takes over. In April 2014, the city was under the control of a state-appointed emergency manager. The goal was simple: save money, cut costs at any price. This goal was to be carried out no matter what. And when it came to the health of the city and saving some dollars, the state chose the latter. It made the decision to switch the city's water source. Flint, for many years, had purchased clean, treated water from Detroit. But the managers decided that was too expensive. Why buy water when you have a natural source in your backyard? That's exactly what the government thought when they decided to make the Flint River the main water source for the community. But just like the curse has been trying to warn, you cannot mess with nature and not pay a hefty price. And the thing about nature is that she is ruthless. She doesn't concern herself with perpetrators and victims. When she is desecrated, everyone pays the price. You see, the Flint River had been the dumping ground for heavy industry for a century. Locals even joked that you dare not swim in it. You barely wanted to look at it. But the officials did the math. Pumping water from the river would save a few $1,000,000. So, they turned the valve. On April 25, 2014, the mayor pressed a button and the city toasted the new era with glasses of river water.
My youngest would tell me, "Mom, it's yellow and it's a filmy, gross, foamy thing, and it would smell like open sewer." But we were being told we're still getting used to the new system. It's safe, it's okay.
They claimed it was a fresh start. They didn't know they were signing a death warrant. The curse here wasn't a supernatural monster. It was a failure of the most basic duty of the government. The officials at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality made a critical error. They didn't require the water to be treated with anti-corrosion chemicals. This sounds like a boring technical detail, but it was the spark that burned the city down. The water from the Flint River was highly corrosive. When it flowed into the city's aging pipes, it didn't just flow through them, it ate them. Flint, like many old cities, had miles of lead service lines, a protective coating inside the pipes that kept the lead from getting into the water. But the corrosive river water stripped that protection away. It was exactly like the loggers stripping the protective trees in Singapore. They removed the shield, creating a path for a deadly poison. Almost immediately, the people of Flint knew something was wrong. The water coming out of their taps was brown. It smelled like rotten eggs. It tasted like metal. People started getting rashes when they showered. Their hair started falling out. They complained to the city. They showed up at town hall meetings holding jars of sludge that looked like coffee. They begged for help. And this is where the curse reveals its true face. In the 1880s, the lumber barons ignored the future to count their money. In 1913, the mine owners ignored the safety of the workers to crush a union. In 2014, the government ignored the citizens to protect a budget. For 18 months, officials stood in front of cameras and told the people of Flint that the water was safe. They dismissed the mothers who said their children were sick. They mocked the residents who said the water was poisonous. But the water was indeed poison. Lead is a neurotoxin, and there is no safe level of lead for a human being. It attacks the brain and the nervous system, and it is especially dangerous for children.
If you were to put anything in a population to keep them down, it's lead. And it doesn't just keep them down for a month, a year, it keeps them down for decades and generations.
While the officials were issuing press releases, thousands of children were drinking lead with every glass of water. It was in their baby formula. It was in their school drinking fountains. Nearly 9,000 children under the age of 5 were exposed. The debilitating effects nearly wiped out a generation. It caused learning disabilities, behavioral problems, and permanent brain damage. The greed of 2014 stole the potential of an entire generation. But it wasn't just the slow poison of lead. The untreated water was a breeding ground for bacteria. An outbreak of Legionnaire's disease swept through the region. It is a severe form of pneumonia. At least 87 people got sick. 12 people died. And for what? To save money on a water bill. This connects directly to the Italian Hall. In 1913, 73 people died because a door was held shut by hate. In 2014, people died because the truth was held back by arrogance. The tragedy in Flint exposed a deep rot in the system. Emails released later showed that officials knew about the risks. They knew the water was bad. But they were more afraid of looking bad than they were of hurting people. It wasn't until a pediatrician named Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha looked at the medical records of the children and saw the spike in lead levels that the truth became undeniable. She risked her career to speak out. She was the modern equivalent of the photographer in the 1880s, capturing the proof that nobody wanted to see. Finally, in October 2015, the city switched back to Detroit water. But the damage was done. The pipes were destroyed. The trust was destroyed. The Curse of Michigan isn't a ghost story. We started this journey looking at a picture of a wolf man in the woods. We thought the monster was something wild, something other. But look at the pattern. The lumber boom. We stripped the land for profit, and the land turned barren. Singapore. We removed the protection for profit, and the sand buried us. The Italian Hall. We crushed the workers for profit, and the children paid the price. Flint. We cut corners for profit, and the water turned to poison. The monster isn't the Dogman. It never was. The monster is the idea that nature, people, and safety are just line items on a budget sheet. The monster is the willingness to sacrifice the future for a quick gain today. Flint wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of a system that values efficiency over humanity. It was a man-made disaster, just like the cutover lands of the 1880s. The recovery has been long and painful. Massive projects to replace the pipes took years. Lawsuits dragged on. Charges were filed against former governors and emergency managers, though many were dismissed. The legal battles brought little comfort to the parents of a child who will struggle in school for the rest of their life because of the water they drank in 2014. We have reached the end of the line. From the 19th century to the 21st, the story remains the same. The Michigan curse is real. But we have to stop looking for it in the shadows. We have to stop looking for it in grainy photos or ghost stories. If you want to see the face of the monster, you don't need to go to the deep woods of Wexford County. You just need to look in the mirror. We are the ones who strip the land. We are the ones who hold the door shut. We are the ones who turn the valve. And until we learn that lesson, the curse will never sleep. Do you believe the Michigan curse is a real force of nature? Or is it just a label we put on the consequences of human greed? Let us know in the comment. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoy this video, please click on the next video on your screen.